So today we'll be having another webinar, and we'll be looking at authoring books and publications using bookdown package. So we'll be having in our midst, we'll be having, so this is our agenda for this evening. We will be, this agenda for this evening will be, welcoming you to the webinar, introducing our speaker, and then we'll give him some time to talk us through the topic, and then we'll have some time for Q&A and some vote of thanks. So we will have, we would like you to mute your yourself, and then you could drop your questions in the chat. And when it's time for us to have the Q&A, you'll be given the floor to probably ask your questions live, and then we'll have a speaker respond. So I hope that's okay with us. Would like to implore all of us to kindly write our names, introduce ourselves in the chat, tell us about yourself, your name, your location, and something fun about you. So we'd like that to keep going on in the chat. As people join in, we'll expect us to just introduce ourselves so that we get to know one another. So without further ado, I would like to introduce to us our speaker for our guest, a special guest for this evening. He's David Kyles. He's the CEO of R for the Rest of Us. Through online courses and custom training, he has helped people and organizations to learn more about R. In addition to training people to use R, David also does some consulting work with research and evaluation organizations, foundations, and others. David creates high-quality data visualizations and helps organizations to use R to improve their workflow and much more. So without further ado, I'd like to give the floor over to David. I'll stop sharing my screen right now, and David, I'll give you the floor and allow you to share your screen. The floor is all yours, David.
Okay, super. Great. Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. Delighted to see so many people here interested in learning about bookdown. Thank you for the introduction. I run R for the Rest of Us. Most people know R for the Rest of Us for a lot of the educational materials we have. We offer several courses, but we also do consulting work. And what I'm going to actually talk about today is the bookdown package, which is something, to be clear, I've used a fair amount, but I wouldn't consider myself a total expert on, but I'm using it specifically to write a book that I'm working on this year and hopefully will be out next year. The book is called R Without Statistics. It's about kind of ways that people use R beyond, kind of complex statistical modeling, that type of thing, things that people think of as being typical uses for R. And I kind of want to highlight some of the other things. So I'll actually show that book as an example. The way I'm going to do this is I don't actually have any slides at all. And the reason why is I just want to basically live code you through making a book. And I'll start out by showing my existing book, and I'll show you what that looks like, how I've kind of made it. And then I'll actually make a book and show you how you can, add some content, customize the look and feel of it, put it online, etc. So I do a ton of speaking on Zoom, very used to it. So if folks have questions as I go along, I'm going to put my screen up in just a second, but I have two screens. I'll have the chat on the other screen. I'm happy to, I'll keep an eye on that. And if you have questions, please feel free to interrupt me. It's going to be fairly, like I said, fairly informal. No slides, mostly exclusively just me kind of walking through things. All right, let me put this up. Let me move this over here and pop up my chat. And if you all haven't actually introduced yourself in the chat, I'm just actually genuinely curious who folks are. So I see someone from New York, Abuja. Yeah, it's just fun for me to see kind of who folks are. So to start out, I'm going to just put up right here. This is the website for my book, R Without Statistics. And I'll go ahead and just pop the link to that in the chat. So again, this is the book that I'm working on. And you can actually see that it lives online. You can go to book.rwithoutstatistics.com and you can see it. And if you look at that and you think, hey, that looks familiar, R for data science looks pretty similar. Yeah, absolutely it does. And the reason why is because both of these are using the bookdown package. There are multiple books that you've probably seen that have this format. So great, I see some other folks from different parts of Nigeria. So let me kind of walk through, first of all, like what the bookdown package does. It's primarily a tool to create books. And I think about it mostly as a way to create kind of a website that accompanies a book that actually is the same content as what is in the book. Again, like with R for data science, all of this content is, you can read the book for free online, or you can order a paper or electronic copy, but it's all the exact same content. And so for me, that's what I think of primarily when I think of the bookdown package. The bookdown package also, though, I'm not really going to talk about it that much, but it also creates a PDF version as well as an EPUB version for electronic reading. So the bookdown, actually, let me just, the bookdown package has really good documentation. So there is, and I'll put this in the chat for folks if you're interested. It's a bit meta, but there is a bookdown. There's a book on how to write books with bookdown, if I said that all correctly. And so the link I sent will take you there. It has again really good documentation by Yihui Shea, I think is how you pronounce it. I'm probably mispronouncing it. So this one you're going to notice actually looks slightly different. It's a slightly different format. This is a kind of newer format for bookdown. This is an older format, and I'll show you how you can choose between the two. So let me first kind of show you. I'm going to bring over here my repository, or my RStudio project that I'm working on. So I'm assuming folks are kind of, if you're here, you're familiar generally with R and kind of how it works. Otherwise, this will be slightly confusing for you. But if you look, for example, actually, let me open up a different one to start up. So if you look over here and you see my files, there are a series of R Markdown documents. Those are the most important things. There are some other things too, which I can talk about in a little bit. But the most important thing is that it has R Markdown documents. And essentially, the overall process with bookdown is that you create a series of R Markdown documents. Each one ends up being a chapter. And then you have some additional files like this bookdown.yaml and output.yaml, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then RStudio can use those to bring them together into a website, which you can then publish online. So for example, if you look here, actually, let me just do that. So I'm looking at the index.rmd. And you can see it's got the title, author, a few other things in the YAML, which I'll talk about shortly, description. But then down here, like, let me actually highlight this. Since R was invented in 1993, it has become, et cetera, et cetera. If you look here, you can see that that content then gets rendered onto this page, which is the index.html page, the landing page for the book. And if I go, for example, to the data viz chapter, you can see there's a chapter on data viz. And you can see that the content that's here also shows up here. And what we have to do is what's called building the book. And I'll show you this in a second. So the way I'm writing my book, and I was actually talking about this, my father's a writer, not of anything related to R, but he couldn't really understand exactly what it meant when I told him I was writing a book using the bookdown package and how it was all online. But what is happening with my book is anybody at any point can see the progress of the book. So at this point, the only chapter that I've actually written something substantial in is the introduction. Without going into too many details, the way the book works is I'm doing interviews for one interview for each chapter, and then I'll use the interview to be kind of a case study for that chapter. And I've decided just to do all the interviews first, and then I'll actually get into the writing. But if you look, for example, in the index, the introduction, that actually has some content, and you can see how I've written it. Now, when I go in and, one thing I'm missing, for example, I'm going to do an interview with someone in New Zealand about how the government there, how R was pretty central to the way that the government fought the COVID pandemic. And so after I do that interview and I add content here, that will then show up on the book. So you can see it, like, it didn't make sense to my dad, because in his mind, you write a book, you work with your editor. Once it's finally ready, then you announce to the world, okay, you have a book. Whereas for me, I'm writing it entirely in public. People can see it. You can see it, not even half finished. Maybe this introduction is half finished. And then you can watch as I make changes to it, which is pretty cool. And so here, for example, like, I've actually done this interview. I started to outline kind of what I want to write. So you can look at it and you can see it's not coherent in any way at this point. It's really just for me, but it's an outline of what I plan to write, and eventually it will get kind of filled out. So that's kind of the background on bookdown, on what it is, how it works, or not how it works. I'll show you the details in a second about how it works, but that's kind of what it looks like, essentially. Before I dive into the details, one other thing I like to highlight, the package is called bookdown, and so everybody thinks of it as a way to write books. But I used to do what's called evaluation consulting, which is essentially like business kind of management consulting, but for nonprofits, helping them to measure how effective their work is. And I would actually write reports sometimes using the bookdown package. So I would have one chapter that was an introduction, then like a chapter that was talking about the methods of, because we would do kind of studies, and it would be one chapter on the methods, then one chapter on the results. And this was actually a really nice way to share things with people. So don't get too hung up on the fact that the package is called bookdown. It's really just a way to put content online, and it gives you a nice kind of structure to do that. All right. Let me flip over here. Let me see if there are any questions at that point before I get started on some actual code. All right, I'm not seeing any, so let me go ahead and dig in. So let's go ahead and create a bookdown project from scratch. So I'm in this project, but I'm going to go ahead and make a new project. I am going to, I'll make it in a new directory. Now, actually, let me take a step back. Of course, the first step is to do install packages bookdown. I should just make my screen, make it slightly bigger. So I don't actually need to do this because, of course, I've installed bookdown, but just to show you, you would install the package that way. Okay, cool. So at that point, now you can go ahead and make a new project. And let me put it in a new directory. So once you've installed bookdown, when you go to either new project or actually, sorry, if just in new project, if you scroll down, you'll see, oh, I think something weird happened because I installed it again, but you'll see that you have book project using bookdown as an option. If you're starting a bookdown project, you could kind of start from scratch and create it with different files, but I would recommend just doing this. So I'm going to say, great, I'm going to make a bookdown project. Let me browse. Let me just put that there. And I'm going to call this bookdown example. I'm going to call this Abuja because I actually just did another project called bookdown example. So just to distinguish. When you look at the different, when you have to select your format, there are two options, Gitbook and BS4 book. So you know how I said that the bookdown book looks slightly different? This is the Gitbook format. This is the BS4 format. It's really personal preference. Personally, I think this looks a little nicer, so I'll go ahead and use that. And I'm going to open this in a new session. All right, let me bring this over here. Okay. So let me look at the content that we have here. You can see, first of all, we have a series of R Markdown documents, intro, cross-references, parts, etc. We also have a .bib file and a .csl file. Those are to do with creating citations. And I'm going to be honest, I haven't gotten to the point in my book where I'm doing that, so I probably won't be able to offer much on that. There's also a .text file for LaTeX formatting of the PDF that's generated from it. I actually don't know LaTeX, so I won't be able to offer you any guidance on that. Again, I'm going to focus exclusively on the kind of website portion of it. I just see a question about whether the BS4 format uses Bootstrap 4. I know BS4 does. I believe that's what that stands for. Here, I'll even Google to make sure. Yeah, built with Bootstrap 4. But I don't know with Gitbook, with the Gitbook format, if it uses Bootstrap. So, yeah, Stephen, I see your question about that. That's a great question. I'll get to that shortly. So let's just hold off on that one. But thank you for asking questions. Please keep doing that. So there's also a README. I don't think, thinking about my other project here on my README, I think the README, I think it just shows up on the GitHub, the associated GitHub repository. I don't actually know for sure. And I'll show you how to put this onto GitHub shortly. There's also a common.r file, which I'll show you in a second, that kind of creates some or sets some global options. And then there are a couple of YAML files. So bookdown.yaml and output.yaml. Now, if you are, if you're used to R Markdown, where just thinking about the YAML here, like this type of YAML, the way bookdown works is it has kind of external YAML files, and those are what is actually used when we build the book to kind of set some options for it. So again, I'll show that shortly. Let me see. So I'm just looking at my notes here. Okay, so let me close a few of these so we can focus here. All right, so one thing that happens when you create a bookdown project is that in the build tab, RStudio knows that this is a book. This is a bookdown project. So if you're working on like a distill website, for example, up here, it won't say build book. I think it says build website. So I can hit build book here, and let's watch what happens. It's going to take just a minute. So if you're looking at this, what you're seeing is that it's rendering. It's kind of similar to the output if you like hit knit on an R Markdown document. You can see it's going in and it's rendering each of these files. Yeah, okay, so it's done. So it's also created a couple directories. So it's created that _bookdown files. I'm not going to actually worry about that too much because I'm going to delete some content and that'll go away. But the most important is that it's created this _book. And you can see within this folder now, we have a whole series of files. We have Markdown documents, which I'm not really going to focus on, but we also have HTML files. So let me bring this over here. And you can see here's, and this should look familiar to you, right? Like this is the bookdown project that we've created. So it doesn't, it's just using default content, which I'll show in a second. But as to create a book, it's really as simple or as straightforward as creating a new project and then just hitting build book. And it does kind of all of the stuff that you need to create your sidebar with your outline and then any content here. So if you look at this index.rmd, you'll see, for example, this is a sample book written in Markdown, etc. You can see, here's the content. So it knows that it can, look for those R Markdown documents and then convert them into HTML files and then kind of bring all those HTML files together. And so each of these, for example, is one chapter. So if I go to Hello Bookdown, you can see I'm looking at hellobookdown.html. And that if I go back here, is it this one? No, wait, sorry. What chapter is that? Chapter 2. Yeah. So this actually comes from the intro.rmd. And so essentially there ends up being for each R Markdown document an associated HTML file. So it's chapter 2 because the index.rmd shows up as chapter 1 here. Great question, Jasmine, about kind of adding or editing content once I build the book. I'll actually, if it's okay, let's just hold off on that. And then I'll show that as I actually add some content. And I can also give examples from my book as well. And also just FYI, if you hear any noises in the background, I can see my children are about to come home. So I've locked my office door, but there still might be some noise. All right, so yeah, so RStudio can kind of create this for you. Let me go back into that _book. A couple other things you're going to see. There's a PDF of it. And this is the actual content of your book. So for example, if I go to about, let me zoom in a little bit so you can hopefully see that better. This is a sample book written in Markdown, right? Like that's the exact same thing. So it both creates a series of HTML files, but it also creates a PDF that you could share as your book. In addition, it creates an EPUB, which I don't even know. Oh, look. Huh. It opened it up in my, what is this, Books app on, I'm on a Mac, so I could read my book this way. And this is nice because you can share it for folks who want to read it on whatever electronic reader they want to read it on. Question about whether you can produce a Word document. Good question. You're gonna watch me. Yeah, I think you can. No, that's R Markdown. I don't. The answer is I am not entirely sure. I think you can, but I don't actually know the answer off the top of my head. Yeah. But if you find out, let me know, because I need to look into that actually to work with my editor on this book. All right. Whoops, I don't want that one. I have this one. Okay. So at this point, let me go back up into my main directory. And I have now installed the package, created a new project, rendered the default content. We've looked at the default content. Okay, let's look now at this index.rmd file. You can see, it's called my book, a minimal book example. The author's John Doe. Let me go ahead and change a couple of these things. So I'll do David Keyes is the author. And I'm going to call my book How to Use R. And let me just change as well. There's a description which shows up. No, actually, where does that? Maybe that doesn't. I thought it would show up because on my book, it shows up if I go into my index.rmd. Oh, you know what? That might actually just be for sharing on social media, I think is what it is. Sorry, wrong project. So I'm actually not going to worry about this for now. I'm going to leave this book, the output format being bookdown site. That just tells R when you knit this to make it into a website, a bookdown website. There's also, if I don't actually know the document class book thing, I don't know what that's for, to be honest. But bibliography, book.bib and packages.bib, that's for, again, working with your bibliography. But like I said, I haven't actually done that yet. So don't actually have a ton to offer there in terms of how you'd work with that. But let me show you now, for example, if I want to change some of this content. So let's say, it just has some default content. Let's say I want to get rid of that and I want to change this and I want to say, this is a book about how to use R. Now, at this point, there are two options. I can hit build book again. As you saw, that took a little bit of time. But I think, let me make sure this works as I think it does. Oh, it looks like it's actually knitting everything. I thought knit would just knit this document, but maybe not. But now if I go back, it's finished with that. And you can see I have chapter 1 about, this is a book about how to use R. And so updating your content is really as simple as just editing there. Now, maybe that didn't work actually, because one thing I noticed is it took away everything else. So let me go ahead, I'm hitting build book again, and let me make sure that kind of creates the whole thing. Yeah, okay, so there we go. So knit looks like it won't do what we want because it looks like that will just render that and not the rest of the book. And you can see also, for example, it says how to use R, that kind of thing there. The title of the page and what shows up in the table of contents comes from the first level header there, so about. So that's why, for example, if I look at this, it says hello bookdown, first level header. That's why that chapter shows up as that. All right, let me pause for a second, see what questions that might bring up for folks. Let me actually see if I can get rid of this. All right, perfect. All right. Now, thinking about this book, let's say like I don't actually want, it's created a bunch of content here. I'm fine with the index.rmd, but let me go ahead and just delete all of the other things, all the other R Markdown documents. So I'm just going to delete those because I don't really need those. I'm going to go ahead and just delete these two folders and just make sure that it gets rendered completely from or built from scratch. So I'm just going to hit build book, which will actually should be much faster now because now the book is literally just this one page. So if I go back here, you can see all I have is about with this is a book about how to use R. Okay. So let me close that, Now, let's say we want to add some other content here. I'm going to go ahead and just make a new R Markdown file. And I think I could hit, I don't know if it'll show up here. No, I don't. All right, let me just make a new R Markdown file and I'll just do HTML for now. But the thing with working with bookdown, and actually, let me see if I can restore. Let me actually put this back. How do here, let me just copy that into my downloads just so I can open it up. So this was the file that I deleted, the intro file. Now note that unlike R Markdown documents that you're used to, it doesn't actually have a YAML on this R Markdown document. It's just goes straight into the content, right? So like if you're used to, seeing YAML like that, when you write a bookdown book, the index.rmd will have your YAML. But the individual files beyond that, you don't need that YAML. And that's because we're actually going to use this bookdown.yaml and output.yaml to set some options. So let me go ahead for now and just save this. And let's say, okay, I'm writing a book about how to use R. So there's the index, and then I don't know, I'm going to have my first chapter about data viz. So let me call that data viz, and then I'm just going to add some filler text there. All right. So now I have index.rmd and data viz. Let me go ahead and hit build book and let's watch what happens. So it'll take a second, although again, it'll be faster. And you can see now I have chapter 1, which is about, and then chapter 2, data viz, which if I go here, shows up like that. So a couple questions I see. Have I experimented with Quarto files for chapters? So I sort of, quarto.org. Hi, Robert, thanks for joining. If folks are not familiar, quarto.org is a kind of new format for working with, it's basically R Markdown, but it's language agnostic and it works across Python, R, Julia, Observable, and I think there are plans for other languages as well, perhaps. And you, I don't know if bookdown, I don't think bookdown could accommodate QMD. QMD files are for Quarto. I don't think it could do that. It might be able to go the opposite way. If folks are interested, I am actually putting together a kind of handbook for the rest of us, which I'm actually building with Quarto. So folks, I posted both a link to the handbook as well as a link to the repository. It's actually a pretty similar process where you have essentially a series of QMD files and a YAML file, and then it kind of builds it all together. Yeah. So I see another question about whether I need 3 different R Markdown documents for bookdown. Not necessarily. I mean, you can make however many you want. It just by default, each one will be 1 chapter. And so you don't need more than 1 R Markdown document per chapter. You can see I just have 1. And I mean, even if you look at this book, the actual book that I'm writing, I just have, this is my data viz chapter. This is the introduction. I have a chapter, I mean, there's nothing there yet, but on making presentations with R. So yeah, pretty much 1 R Markdown document per chapter is how it works. Thank you for the questions. Please keep them coming. All right, so I have now created this. Let's say actually instead of about, let me call this introduction. I just hit build again, just because I think that would be better. So now you can see I have introduction data viz. And I'm just going to comment these lines out because again, I'm not going to actually do anything with the bibliography. So that'll work even without that. All right. All right, so looking at my notes, let's see, I've removed files, I've added files. Okay, so by default, the order of files that shows up here will be in alphabetical order. Well, the index.html will always be first. I assume everyone has seen index.html files. They're kind of, the homepage for whenever you start something on the web. The other files, though, if I go back here, will show up in alphabetical order. So let's say I make a new chapter. I'll do just new R Markdown. It's fine. I'm going to call this one. Let's say this is data importing. And I'll call this data import. Now, if I build this, so data import is alphabetically before data viz. So that will actually let me make sure. Yeah. Data importing will come first, then data viz because of that order. And again, nothing will ever go before introduction. That will always be the very first thing. Let's say though, let me add one more file. And I want to call this R Markdown. Let's close R Markdown. Let's say I want to actually introduce R Markdown before I teach people anything about data viz or data importing or anything like that. Now, if I build this, as you probably expect, R Markdown, R is after D, so it's going to show up as the very last chapter there. So let's look at how we would use this file to change the order. All right, so in this bookdown.yaml, there are a few things going on. I'm not actually going to worry too much about this. The only one I'll point out, this book file name, bookdown example Abuja, is, I think, let me make sure. Yeah, when you render it and it creates the PDF, it's what your PDF and EPUB files are called. So if I change that, let me make sure this actually works the way I think it will. Now it'll call it bookdown example Abuja 2, I believe. Yeah, so you can see it did that. I don't actually need to do that. There's some other options here. I'm not going to worry about those for now, but I am going to look at down here, and I'm going to actually have to look at my other example here. Jasmine, really good question. I'm going to answer that shortly about creating parts, which I'll show you in a second. Okay, so here's the syntax. So if you were to look at the bookdown.yaml, so if I actually show you, you're welcome to look at my code for this repository. You can look at the bookdown.yaml. You can see it's got this section here, and I'll just do it on RStudio because it's easier, it looks bigger. What that does is it allows me to manually set the order. And so let me just copy this, put it in, oops, keep hitting the wrong one. Now that's not going to work, right? Because I don't have these files, but let me add files here. So let's say I want to have rmarkdown.rmd. Let's say I want data import.rmd and then data viz.rmd. We can build that. Now, by default, Bookdown will just build things in alphabetical order. That's why, if you remember, the files that it initially had were like 0, 1, 0, 2. So if you, another way to, like, you don't have to manually set the order here. You could also just name your files 0, 1, 0, 2. And that will work as well. Sorry, I'm just looking because I know there was another question and I want to note it for later. Jasmine, you asked another question early on, and if I don't get back, if I forget to get back to it, please just ask it to me later again. All right, so let me go ahead now and go back here, find this. So you can see now I've got introduction, R Markdown, data importing, data viz, and that's because I've specified here what I want the order to be. All right. Okay, so that's how I have created or changed the order of this. Let me see if, yeah, no, I'll actually, I see the other question from Stephen about the special character in front of headers and what that does. I'll get to those actually both together. So, okay. Give myself a note so I don't forget these. All right, so that's the bookdown.yaml. It's essentially to control kind of like what happens with the output. There's also an output.yaml. And there are a few things going on here. So the first section here allows us to kind of control the overall look and feel. There's a CSS, which I'll get to in a second. But just starting out, like the simplest thing here is to look at this. This is the primary color. And so by default, if you look at this book, it's using this as the primary color, which is, actually, no. Sorry, that's not what I wanted. It's that kind of, I don't know, greenish color. And you can see it has it down here as well as it uses it here for the color of links. All right, so let me show you how you could change this. So I'm going to change it to that, which is in orange, that I use for the rest of us stuff. So watch what happens now when I render this, when I build the whole book. You can see now that it's changed the primary color to orange. So we have changed that. Let me now focus. Oh, good question. I'm going to get to that one about whether the YAML, the output.yaml must go to a repo. Can it go to a local drive? Let me actually, I'll do one other thing and then I'll answer your question. All right. So the other thing you can do is you can style your book. And you do that with style.css. Actually, the question that just came up about using multiple colors for branding purposes, yeah, definitely. So the way it works is that there's a primary color which it uses for links and that kind of thing. But I'll show you within the style.css how you could change other pieces as well. So if I open up style.css, this is where I can change different things. So, and I don't know, I've had different people have different levels of familiarity with HTML and CSS. I'm going to assume people know some very basics, and but I'll also kind of walk through exactly what I'm doing. So what I did, actually, let me undo that. If you right click on any page and then you hit inspect, it allows you to see the source code of an HTML document. And the nice thing too is if you actually go to an individual element and then hit inspect, it'll take you to the exact point in the source code where the HTML is for that. So this is the introduction. It's an H1 tag. So let's say I want to change the H1. And actually, the other thing I can do is I can look at the styles, and this shows me what the styles that are applied to it are. If I hit computed, though, that will actually show me like what's the actual size. And so it's showing up as 2.5 rem, which I'm not going to go into complicated CSS stuff, but let me show you how you could change that. So if I hit H1, open curly brackets, close curly brackets, and hit like font size 100 pixels. This is going to be way too big, but let me show you what happens. So that'll get built. And you can see now I've made that all H1s will show up like that. Way too big, but you get the point. Now you could also do things like, let's say, for example, so that color that I added is the blue that I use for R for the rest of us. So if I build this again, what you're going to see is that now all H1s will show up in blue. So in terms of your question about using multiple colors, yeah, it's basically at this point, however you want to style it using CSS, you can style individual elements, use multiple colors, do whatever you want. I mean, you do have to know some CSS, of course, to be able to do this, but it's definitely possible. Let me show you, though, what the CSS for my book looks like, because I actually did a decent amount of customization. So if you notice, my book is using a different font. This is I don't even know what exactly the font is that it's using. So I'm going to go to computed font family. Okay, so it's just using the system sans serif font, which I think is called San Francisco. Again, because I'm on a Mac. But I decided, you know what, I want to use a different font. This font is one called IBM Plex. There's a series, a set of fonts for it. Good question, Alex. I'm actually just going to note that down. I'll ask it later, or I'll answer it later. So to do that, the code here is how I set the font. So if you've never used Google Fonts, that's probably the easiest way to use a custom font. So let's say, for example, okay, I've decided I want to use, I go here, I find a font. Let's say I want to use Open Sans. You have to select not just the overall font, but the specific variations you want. So like, do you want, usually what I'll select is regular italic, and let me do bold. So just those three for now. Now it's going to give you code. You're going to actually want this @import. And what I'm going to do is just grab, this is basically code that you would put in CSS. I don't need the style wrapper thing. I can just get the @import URL. And you can see that that actually looks really similar to what I've done here. Right? And so what that does is it gives me access. So you can't just say, use Roboto or IBM Plex Sans, because we don't know that the person who's looking at it would have it on their computer. So by adding this import line or lines, what it does is it allows us to make those fonts available no matter what. So what I did then is I said, that from there, once I have them available, I do font family, IBM Plex Sans. And so that makes it so that everything by default will show up in IBM Plex Sans font. Did a few other things where I basically said I want all headers, so H1 through H6, to be font weight 700. If you look, for example, the font weight here, let me go down here. Yeah, so by default, the headers are font weight 500, which is just not quite as heavy, not quite as bold. You can see mine end up being much bolder. I just like that. And so, yeah, there are a lot of ways to change it. Actually, you know what? I'm looking at something that I might potentially want to change here. My H1, the line height looks like by default, it's 1.3. I actually think that's it's too much. So one thing you can do is you can actually play around here with line height and then see what that looks like. I actually think that looks much better. So let me go back here and let me add this. So I'm going to change this so that by default, all headers will have a line height of 1. Now what I can do is I can build this book. And this might actually take just a second more. So I need to open up the local version of it, not the online version. You can see it takes a little bit, just depending on how much content you have. Okay, I think that did it. Yep, so you can see now I have updated that. Going back to the book that I have created. Yeah, so Stephen, I'm going to talk about version control, and I'll show you in a second how you can kind of push this to GitHub and have it on there. So if I wanted to use that Roboto, I would then say font family, Roboto, and then this is what's called a fallback. So it's basically saying, if the person doesn't have, or if for some reason Roboto doesn't work, then let's use just the default sans serif instead. So if I go back here, you can see the font has now switched and it's using Roboto, which I could actually, if I inspect this, if I go to computed, font family, you can see that it's using Roboto. All right, let me go back to the output.yaml. So for the repo, I don't think you can do that. It can't be locally. What this is used for, if I go to this book, if I hit view source, it's going to actually take me to the source of the book. Now, that didn't go like to the source for this book because I haven't changed that. That's just the default because I brought in the default content for bookdown. But let me even look. Actually, I don't even know with mine if I ever changed that. So like if I hit, oh no, that does work. Yeah, so I did change it on mine. No, I don't have a repository yet. So in a second, I'm going to push this to GitHub and I'll show you how to do it on how to change this then at that point. So in just a second, I'll do that. And then we can edit it here. So the nice thing about that is if people want to, view the source, they can just hit that and view the source for this particular page, which is handy. All right. Cool. And I still have in mind the questions, which I will get to. And I'm actually going to get to the questions about the things in front of the headers now. So by default, let me just close a couple of things. All right. So you've probably noticed that by default, it's going to add chapter numbers here. It's chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4. On my book, though, it doesn't have that. And the reason why is if you go to any individual file and you add that, it will remove that numbering. So let me go back to this and let me go to, I don't know, like the data viz chapter. And let me build it again. And you'll see what's going to happen is that it will actually remove that numbering. So now it shows 1, 2, 3, but then data viz doesn't have a number. So unfortunately, with the BS4 book format, there's no way to kind of globally say, don't add numbering. You have to do it to every single one. So if I wanted to do it like that, do it like that, and then build it again. Oh wait, I probably need to do it in the introduction as well. So yeah, there isn't a way to do it globally. You just have to add it individually. The other thing that you can do is I have sections here. So my book is divided in, there's an introduction. There is illuminate, communicate, automate, and conclusion. So let me show you how, actually, I'll just even show you in the repository. Actually, let me find a good one. So yeah, I'll go to the data viz chapter. So to add a section, you use that that format. So you add this kind of part thing. And I only know this from I basically read the bookdown documentation really carefully. So just to show you, like, let's say on the book that I'm building, I want to, I'll have introduction and then I'll have a section there. So I want it to be right before the R Markdown file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, I don't know, different parts of R. So now if I build this again, it should add right before R Markdown different parts of R. And you can see I've got a section there. Now I did these look different here. I basically used some custom CSS to make those like uppercase and bold. But what, all you have to do, not all you have to do, it does take some knowledge, but is, figure out the CSS to apply it to. So if I look at my CSS, it was, that is the sidebar, book part, and And so I made it have some spacing on the top. I transformed it to uppercase and I made it 700 weight. So if I go back into my style.css and I add that here and I build it again, this should now show up in that same way. And you can see I've done that. All right, so I've got those questions. Alex, your question is a really good one to talk through at the very end when after I do the other stuff. So I'll hold that one. But Stephen, I'm going to get to your question now. Let's talk about okay, great. I have this website that I've made of my book, but it's all just on my computer, right? Like it doesn't really serve anyone. Nobody can read it. So let's actually talk about how you would put this online. So to do this, it's really the same as working with any other GitHub repository. I'm going to use the use this package. And I'll first make this, I'll initialize a Git repository to make this, to make the local project the Git repository. So it's going to ask me, it's going to commit all these things, okay to commit them. Yeah. Is it okay to restart it? Yes. So I do that. Now I have a local Git repository. You can see here. And now let me go ahead and push this to GitHub. So again, I'll do library use this, and then I'll use the use GitHub function. And this will take my local Git repository, take my local project, and it'll push it to GitHub. So let me do that. Oops, popped up on the other screen. Now I have this repository here on GitHub, and this is exactly the same as what I have locally. And you can see I've got this book _book folder. Okay, so by default, though, I've got an index.html file. GitHub is great, but what GitHub is about looking at source code, right? This is the source code of my HTML. But I don't want to share the source code. I want people to actually be looking at the rendered version of it. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually host it. Now, there are ways to do this with what's called GitHub Pages, which is a way to host your content that's on GitHub. Honestly, I find it a little bit slow. My preferred way of doing this is using what's called Netlify. Netlify is what's called a static host. They host HTML files, and they have a really generous free tier, so you can use it without paying. So I'm going to log in, and you can see some other projects that I have actually show up here. So for example, this handbook.rfortherestofus.com that I showed before, I'm using Netlify to actually render that, to host that, I should say. So on Netlify, what we can do is we can connect Netlify to GitHub. And what that means is anytime anything happens on GitHub, any changes, anything like that, it will automatically update on Netlify as well. So to do that, I'm going to go to add new site and import an existing repository. You'll have to just enter your password if you haven't ever done this before. I have clearly done this a lot. So I'm going to now search for the project, the GitHub repository. So there we go, bookdown example Abuja. It's going to ask you for a few options. If you have different branches, which I definitely don't at this point, you can choose to only deploy one branch or another branch. The most important thing is the base directory. Remember that when it built our book, it put everything in that _book directory. So what I need to do here is I need to do _book. And what that means is it's only going to look for files in that folder, in that _book, and it's going to use those to deploy our site. I'm not going to worry about the build command. I'm not going to worry about anything else. It'll automatically put that for us. I'm just going to hit deploy site. So you can see it's deploying. What it's going to do at this point is it's going to, again, it's going to basically be copying those files and automatically publishing them. You can see it gives you this log, which shows you everything that it's done. It's really fast. That's why I like it, as opposed to, I find GitHub pages really slow to render. And so at this point, you can see it says site is live. Well, now you're probably wondering, okay, great, like where is our site live? Let me go back here and let me go to site overview. It automatically, by default, will give us a URL. And you can see it just published it there. Now it's a really weird URL. You can change that. So I could hit domain settings, edit site name, and I could call this, I don't know, bookdown Abuja. Save that. And now I have bookdownabuja.netlify.app. So I see a couple of specific questions about Netlify. So Jasmine, yeah, you do have to create a separate Netlify account. It's separate from GitHub, but it's free for the free tier. So yeah, you need to do that. Other advantages, honestly, Stephen, the main advantage is just I find maybe GitHub Pages is different now, but I find it just slow to render. It just takes a while if I make changes, which I'll show in just a second. Netlify, like let me actually make a change and show you like how fast it is. So let's say I am working now on my book. And oh, actually, you know what? Instead of that, let me work on, remember how I made that change to my book, my actual book, where I changed the line spacing here. So let me commit all of my changes. So I'll commit those and I'll just say adjust line spacing on headers. Okay, now before I actually push this, let me go find the that project. Okay, so let's I'm in my deploys, and I had to bring that up because you're going to see it's going to actually happen pretty fast. So I'm going to push this. I'm going to push my changes to GitHub. You can see it's already pulled it in from GitHub, and you'll see. Oh, why did that not work? Oh, it's just starting now. So it's bringing it in from GitHub, preparing a bunch of stuff, processing my HTML, and it's live. So now if I go back to this, you can see it's, here, let me even open it up here. You can see now that is the line height of 1, whereas this, before I changed it, was 1.3. So that's how you can make changes. And if I go back to this project, like let's say I, add some content, I render it again, and I'll say, oh wait, before I do that, let me build my book. And let me go ahead and commit this. And I'll say add content to R Markdown chapter. Push that. Go back to Netlify. See. You can see it's starting up. And it is live. So if I go back here and go to my, oh wait, I changed the URL. If I go to R Markdown here, you can see it's already added my content in. Now, remember that we hadn't changed the source or the GitHub URL. So now that we have a GitHub URL, which is that, Let me go back into my output and add that there. After I do that, I'm going to build my book again, because what that does is it's going to recreate the HTML files with the appropriate link to the right place. So that's done. So I'll do add GitHub repo, push that. Go back to my deploys, can watch it deploy super quickly. It's, sorry, I'm probably doing this too fast. It's live. I can go here. If I refresh that, now the source will actually take me to the associated GitHub page. So let me see, look at my notes, see if there's anything else. I think that is actually it on the specifics of how this works. Let me actually ask though, or let me answer the question from Alex, and then we can kind of throw it open to any other questions that people might have. So Alex, you asked from an author perspective, how do I maintain my book through several editions? I don't know the answer to that because I haven't written several editions yet. But you actually make me wonder about how somebody else has done that. So I'm thinking, for example, of R for Data Science, which I actually know they are working on a new version of it. Actually, you can even see Hadley Wickham was committed 6 hours ago to respond to some feedback on Twitter. I don't know how they do that. I wonder, maybe they're using, no, they just have one branch. I don't know the answer, Alex. So, I mean, one thing I would think I could do, you could, this is probably overly complicated, but with Netlify, you can set it up so that it will only deploy a certain branch. So I could, for example, after I finish writing the book, make a branch called, V1 or whatever, push everything there, and then have a website that renders based on that branch. And then if I want to do a version 2 in the future, make a new branch or something like that. But again, like I just haven't gotten there, so I'm not totally sure of best practices on that. Great. Well, I think that's all. Let me just look back and see if there's anything else that I wanted to mention here. All of this other stuff here is about the PDF and EPUB versions that get created. Again, like I just don't really do anything with those, so I'm not the person to ask about how to deal with that. But the stuff up here is mostly what I deal with. So I'll stop talking at this point and see kind of what questions folks might have.
Okay, so David, are you done?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions at this point.
Okay, I noticed that while your presentation was on, you were busy answering the questions in the chat. So do we have any questions for David? Okay, I think I can see one question just popped in.
Yeah, I see one about, yeah, you're right. I didn't actually add any R code. So let me go ahead and and show you how you would do that. So I have some code. So let me add packages. Okay, so I'm going to say, here's how to make a data viz. So, whoops, wrong button. So I have, and I'll just actually show folks. This is just some code that I was using before. So make a really unattractive data viz from the Palmer Penguins with data from the Palmer Penguins package. So if I go ahead and build this, take just a second. Now look at the local version. Let me go to data viz. You can see that it's added that there. So yeah, it's exactly the same as any other R Markdown format. So let's say, for example, we don't want all that. I could say message equals false, and I don't think it's a warning, but warning equals false too, I'll add. The other thing is this common.r, I didn't actually really talk about it, but you're probably used to seeing like a chunk early on in an R Markdown document. What this does is it allows you to set it here, and that applies to, so actually, no, maybe it just automatically looks for a common.r. Anyway, the default code chunk options are created in that common.r underscore common.r file. So you can see here, here's how to make a data viz. It'll show my code, which I could remove with the echo option, and then it will show my output there. I see one question, and then I see someone with a hand raised as well. Do I run the output.yaml file to render? No, you don't actually run that. You just, you have when you hit this build book button, it looks at what you have in the output.yaml and uses that to create it. So for example, if you remember, how we set the repository, what that actually does, for example, it will set make it so the view source will link to individual pages. And that happens because it adds that to the HTML of each page when it renders it. So you don't run this file, you just hit build book. The other thing you can do, I think, let me see if that works. Yeah, on a Mac, it's Command-Shift-B is a keyboard shortcut. So when I'm working on my book, if I want to render it, I'll hit Command-Shift-B to see the whole thing. I mean, nothing changed. And I think you can also, is it bookdown render? Yeah, I can also use the function bookdown render book, which will do the same thing. Olufemi, sorry if I mispronounced that.
Olufemi, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you very much for a very good presentation. So I think before I ask my question, I think I would like to also contribute to the question about the second edition.
Yeah.
Because over here, I think I am on the repo, the R for Data Science, the second edition. If you go to the _quarto.yaml, I think the line 6 there, I think the answer is there in the line 6, if you look at the line 6. _quarto.yaml.
Okay.
Line 6.
Yeah. Well, so this one here, I think this is still the first edition. So I'm guessing they're putting the second edition somewhere else. Maybe it still has that. The thing is, I don't know where it's actually rendered to, like where, in other words, where I could preview it. Do you know what I mean?
Okay, so do we have any more questions for David? We still have some time, so do we have more questions for David? Or everything is clear to us? I want to say thank you, David, for this very interesting presentation. I really I really found it very interesting because I actually I'm just very new to R, so I'm learning quite a lot, and I've learned how to use R Markdown scripts, how to, put in the chunks there and now knit it and get a PDF or a Word document or HTML. So I find it very, very interesting. And then now looking at writing a book, so there's a lot we can do with R. So the floor is open. Do we still have questions for David? I think someone has posted something in the chat for you, David.
Oh yeah. Other applications of bookdown, is it only publications or books? I mean, like I said before, I've used it just to write reports, and just having it broken up into sections. So I mean, it can be a website too, honestly. Like you could, well, before Quarto was introduced, I was going to use bookdown to write the handbook for my company. I think you can use it for whatever you want. I mean, just to show folks, like if you're interested, there we go. I'll put this in the chat. There is the Quarto is kind of a new way of writing books. It actually is really, I mean, it's going to look pretty similar with your sidebar, main content, and then that to show kind of sections of the page. So it's another format. Obviously it's beyond what we're going to cover today, but it's another way to write books with R, or in this case Quarto, which is really similar.
Okay, thank you, David. Any additional questions for David as we wrap up this webinar? Bilikisu, do you want to say something?
Yeah, okay, before we round up finally, so I just want to say a big thank you to David. We're really honored to have you get to be on our webinar despite your busy schedule. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. So I also like to appreciate all those who took out time to join us, especially those who came early, so early. I'll start with Zara from Tehran University, Alex from Canada, Robert Klein, Jasmine. You've kept the real webinar alive today. I'm grateful to Thomas Carson too for showing up, Stephen and Oluwafemi, every other person that really asked questions here and was patient enough to follow through to the end of the webinar. Was saying a big thank you. And I want to acknowledge all those who came from all over Nigeria, even despite that, okay, this is Abuja localized group. So I want to say a big thank you, and I want to mention the states. So I think David can take some of our states along with him. So I want to appreciate those who are joining us from Bauchi State, Maiduguri, Sokoto, Lagos, Zaria, Makurdi, Ogun, Ibadan. I'm really grateful for your participation, and from all over the world, we are really, really grateful. And thank you, Mabel, for a really good job doing. Thank you so much. You really did a great job. So at this point, thank you, David. So I'll hand over to Mabel to round up.
Okay, I think Bilikisa has done a great job in thanking everyone. I remember that at the very beginning, I forgot to introduce myself. So my name is Mabel Awo Ajumobi. I'm an epidemiologist and a very strong member of this R group, and also the R ladies group. So we're glad to have you guys on board, and we would like to invite you to our future webinars. We'll be having a series of them. Please be on the lookout for our LinkedIn page. You'll see them as they pop up, and feel free to join us. Tell your friends to join us for our webinars. It's really, R is very interesting. It's a very interesting package. You can see that R can do a lot. Today I've learned that we could use R to write a book. So that's just to tell you that you can do a lot with R, irrespective of your field, whether you're an epidemiologist or you work in the bank or wherever you work, you keep generating data, and data needs to be analyzed. And R is a package that you need to use to do most of your analysis because of the excellent visualizations we could get from R. So I want to thank all of you from every part of the world that have made time out to join us. Bilkisu has read out the various locations that you're all joining us from, and we're really excited to have you here. And we want to say thank you to David for the excellent presentation, for taking time out of your very busy schedule to be with us on this webinar. And I think that's all from my end, except Bilkisu has any final words before we call it a day.
So I think that would be a bye-bye for me.
Bye, everyone.
So thank you so much, David.
And see you at our next webinar.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. And I put in the chat a link to a blog post that folks might be interested on Bookdown.
Okay.
Okay, so definitely we'll check it out. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right.
Okay,
Thanks,
bye,
everyone. Have a good day.
You too. Bye.